I stood shivering in the freezing, relentless Seattle rain while the man I had loved for 5 years hurled my expensive luggage down our front steps. My designer clothes, folded just an hour prior, spilled onto the muddy lawn, ruined in a singular agonizing instant. It was my positive pregnancy test. He pointed a rigid, furious finger in my face and screamed that he had undergone a secret vasectomy 3 years ago, declaring with venom that he would never raise another man's bastard. He locked me out in the storm, convinced he was the righteous victim clearing the house for a reason I had yet to discover. He had no idea that his cruel, calculated lie was about to trigger a devastating chain of events that would strip him of his company, his dignity, and his entire future. All thanks to a $50 million secret from a past I had long buried. My name is Sydney, and I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust broken by the person you loved most, only to rise from the ashes stronger, colder, and infinitely more powerful than before. Growing up in the volatile foster system taught me how to survive almost anything, but nothing prepared me for the devastating, clinical betrayal I experienced on that stormy Tuesday night. The relentless Pacific Northwest rain battered my face as I stared up at the custom oak door of our Bellevue home. Now, I was standing on the flooded driveway, watching Trent destroy everything we had built together. My 36-year-old husband stood on the covered porch, protected from the elements. The warm, inviting glow of the exterior carriage lights illuminated his handsome face, which was currently twisted into a terrifying mask of pure rage. He grabbed my heavy, imported leather suitcase by the handle and swung it wildly over the railing. The industrial zipper burst open upon impact with the concrete walkway. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and carefully tailored slacks scattered across the wet grass, instantly soaking up the mud and freezing water. I tried to step forward, my hands raised in a desperate pleading gesture. "Trent, please stop," I begged, my voice cracking against the roaring wind. "What are you doing? Let us go inside and talk about this. The neighbors are going to hear us." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the sound of the pouring rain, echoing down the affluent, manicured street. "Let them hear us, Sydney. Let the whole neighborhood know exactly what kind of manipulative, cheating woman you really are." He reached into the pocket of his expensive tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small white object. He threw it at me with such aggressive, blinding force that it bounced off my waterproof trench coat and landed in a dark, muddy puddle at my feet. I looked down. I had planned to surprise him when he got home from his corporate office. I had planned to celebrate the family we were finally, miraculously starting. Instead, he was looking down at me with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Do not try to pin this bastard on me," he shouted, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. I stared at him, shell-shocked. My mind struggled to process the sheer terrifying hostility of his words. "Trent, what are you saying? This is our baby. We talked about this, we planned for this." He took a menacing step toward the edge of the porch, his fists clenched rigidly at his sides, projecting an aura of dominance. "Stop lying to my face, Sydney. I had a vasectomy 3 years ago. I never reversed it. There is no biological way that the child growing in your stomach belongs to me. So tell me, which one of your wealthy, high-profile public relations clients have you been sleeping with? Which one of them knocked you up?" The air was knocked out of my lungs. The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from our shared reality that for a brief, terrifying second, I thought he was experiencing some kind of severe psychological break. I wiped the freezing rain from my eyes, desperately trying to reason with the man towering above me. "Trent, you know exactly how I got pregnant," I cried, my voice trembling with raw desperation. "We did a rigorous cycle of in vitro fertilization 2 years ago. We froze 3 healthy embryos because of your corporate travel schedule. I told you last month that I was scheduling the transfer. I asked you to come to the fertility clinic with me." I remembered that day. I had stood in our chef's kitchen, holding the glossy clinic brochures, begging him to join me for the crucial appointment. He had barely looked up from his glowing laptop screen, claiming he had an urgent, high-stakes corporate audit to prepare for, and told me to just handle the medical appointments myself. He scoffed, shaking his head with an exaggerated, theatrical display of disbelief. "You really think I am that stupid?" I called the clinic, Sydney. "They told me you never showed up for any transfer. You are making up this elaborate, psychotic lie to cover up your disgusting affair. And I am not going to stand here and let you make a fool out of me in my own home." My heart hammered against my ribs. None of what he was saying made any logical sense. I had been at the clinic. I had the official medical records, the stamped receipts, the post-procedure discharge papers. I reached into my coat pocket to grab my phone, intending to pull up the secure patient portal to prove it to him right then and there. "Look at my medical portal, Trent," I insisted, my fingers slipping on the wet screen. "The transfer was completed on the 14th. Dr. Aris performed it himself. Just look at the screen." I walked up the bottom step, holding out my glowing phone like a desperate peace offering. But before I could even show him the digital display, he swatted my hand away. The phone flew out of my grasp and clattered down the concrete stairs, the screen shattering into a useless spiderweb of sharp glass. "I do not need to look at your fake, fabricated evidence," he snarled, his eyes narrowing with a terrifying cold calculation that made my blood run instantly cold. "I know the truth. You are a cheater, a liar, and a fraud. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning." He turned around, picked up the final cardboard box of my personal belongings from the grand entryway, and dumped it unceremoniously over the railing. Books, high-end cosmetics, and my favorite ceramic coffee mug shattered against the hard surface, sending sharp shards flying into the relentless rain. "This is my house," Trent yelled, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "My name is on the deed, and you have exactly 0 rights to be here. Leave your keys on the mat. If you try to come back inside, I will call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." I stood there, paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming violence of his rejection. This was the man who had promised to protect me. This was the man I had financially supported through his grueling, low-paying corporate promotions, the man whose empty, sterile house I had turned into a beautiful, vibrant home using my own hard-earned capital. Now, he was looking at me like I was an enemy he desperately needed to eradicate. My hands trembled uncontrollably, not just from the biting, aggressive cold of the Seattle storm, but from the cruel miscalculation he was making. I knew the truth. I knew the baby growing inside me was biologically his. I knew I had never been unfaithful for a single second of our entire 5-year marriage. As a crisis public relations consultant, I made a lucrative living analyzing human behavior, detecting corporate lies and managing catastrophic scandals. I knew exactly what a fabricated, desperate narrative looked like. And looking into Trent's cold, calculating eyes, a sickening realization washed over me. He was a man executing a planned strategic exit strategy. The rage was performative. The vasectomy claim was a calculated, weaponized lie designed to destroy my credibility. He stepped back inside the warm, dry foyer and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. "Have a nice life, Sydney. Try to find a gullible fool who actually wants to raise another man's mistake." The heavy oak door slammed shut with a sickening final thud. The deadbolt clicked loudly into place, echoing in the damp night air. I was left alone in the dark, soaking wet, staring at the shattered ruins of my marriage scattered across the muddy lawn. But as I stood there in the pouring rain, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach, a quiet, terrifying resolve began to take root deep in my chest. He had just made the biggest miscalculation of his life. The heavy deadbolt clicked, echoing loudly just moments after Trent had locked me out. The oak door swung open again, casting a long, mocking shadow across the flooded walkway. I briefly thought Trent had miraculously come to his senses. I stepped forward, rain dripping from my eyelashes, ready to explain the clinic protocols, the embryo transfer, and the scientific facts he was so deliberately ignoring. But Trent was not alone. Stepping onto the covered porch, holding a steaming ceramic mug of tea, as if she were watching a theatrical performance from a balcony seat, was his 62-year-old mother, Patricia. Right behind her hovered Courtney, his 32-year-old sister, wearing a smug, satisfied grin that mirrored her brother. They had been inside the entire time. They had listened to him hurl my belongings into the freezing mud and falsely accuse me of infidelity, and they had done nothing to stop it. "Patricia," I gasped, my voice hoarse from the freezing wind. "Tell him he is making a catastrophic mistake. You know we froze embryos 2 years ago. You were at the hospital with us when they retrieved them. You know this baby is his." Patricia took a slow, deliberate sip from her mug. Her coiffed silver hair remained untouched by the violent storm raging just feet away from her. She looked down at me, her cold gaze sweeping over my ruined designer clothes and my shattered phone on the concrete stairs. "Do not drag me into your disgusting lies, Sydney," Patricia said, her aristocratic voice dripping with pure venom. "Trent told us you cancelled the transfer. He told us you have been acting erratically, staying out late, working with those high-profile male clients of yours. We all know exactly what happens in the crisis PR industry. You are a career-obsessed woman who finally realized her biological clock was ticking and panicked." I stared at her, the profound betrayal compounding with every single syllable she uttered. They were actively, maliciously rewriting our history. Courtney stepped forward, leaning casually against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Just give it up, Sydney," Courtney sneered. "My brother is far too smart to fall for your pathetic trap. He had the vasectomy to ensure you could not trap him with a pregnancy when your little PR business inevitably went under. You thought you could sleep around, get pregnant, and use our family wealth to secure your future. It is pathetic." I shook my head, my mind spinning from the sheer audacity of their synchronized gaslighting. "What family wealth?" I demanded, the initial shock finally giving way to a burning, white-hot anger. "I paid for the renovation of this entire house. I funded Trent's lavish lifestyle while he was a struggling junior associate. I built my agency from the ground up while you, Courtney, have lived off your husband's paycheck for a solid decade." Patricia slammed her mug down on the patio table. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" she hissed, her face contorting with ugly rage. "I told Trent from the very beginning that marrying a nobody with no family background was a humiliating mistake. You grew up in the foster system, you have no pedigree, no class, and no concept of loyalty. You are just a stray dog he brought home out of pity, and now you are biting the hand that fed you. We allowed you into our family, and you repaid us by cheating on my son and trying to pass off a bastard child as a rightful heir." Trent stepped in front of his mother and sister, puffing out his chest, emboldened by his toxic audience. "Let us make one thing clear, Sydney. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. And I am keeping this house. You foolishly agreed to leave your name off the deed to secure a better mortgage rate because of your student loans. You have no legal standing here, you have no family to run to, you have nothing. Take your wet clothes and start walking. If you are not off my property in 60 seconds, I am calling the police." The cruelty was so synchronized, so orchestrated, that the terrifying truth finally clicked into place. This was not a spontaneous emotional argument. This was a strategic ambush. They had planned this exact moment. They wanted to break me mentally and financially, stripping me of the assets I had poured into this marriage, leaving me stranded on the street with an unborn child. They believed I was a weak, isolated orphan who would simply crumble under their combined weight. I stood my ground, the freezing rain soaked through my trench coat, chilling me to the bone, but the fire igniting in my chest kept me still. I looked at Trent, then at Patricia, and finally at Courtney, memorizing the smug satisfaction plastered across their arrogant faces. I was about to tell them that I would drag them through every single courtroom in the state, that I would subpoena every medical record and expose their malicious fraud to the world. But before I could utter a single syllable, a blinding beam of light sliced through the heavy downpour. The low, unmistakable purr of a high-performance engine cut through the sound of the crashing rain. A sleek, midnight black luxury sedan glided smoothly up our long driveway, its tires slicing through the deep puddles with arrogant ease. It was a vehicle that cost more than Trent's entire annual salary, a car that commanded immediate attention and respect. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop right behind my ruined luggage. The headlights illuminated the rain-soaked driveway, freezing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney in their tracks. The smug grins melted off their faces, replaced instantly by a sickeningly eager anticipation. Before the occupant could step out into the violent storm, the front door of the house was pushed open even wider. Jamal rushed onto the porch. At 34 years old, Jamal was a striking man who usually carried himself with quiet, steady dignity. Tonight, however, his face was pale with horror. He held my heavy wool winter coat tightly in his hands. His eyes darted frantically from the scattered debris of my life to my freezing figure standing in the mud. "Sydney, you are freezing," Jamal said, his voice thick with deep empathy and disbelief. He took a decisive step down the concrete stairs, extending the warm coat toward me. "Please take this coat. You cannot be out here in this weather." Before his foot could even hit the second step, Courtney lunged forward with terrifying speed. She dug her manicured nails into Jamal's forearm and yanked him backward. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her face twisted with ugly territorial rage. "Do not give that cheating fraud a single thing from this house. She is trespassing on our property." Jamal stumbled back, his jaw tightening as he looked at his wife. "Courtney, look at her," he pleaded, dropping his voice to a desperate, urgent whisper. "She is pregnant, she is freezing in the rain. This is insane. You cannot just throw her out into a severe storm like this." Trent whipped around, pointing his finger directly at Jamal's chest. "You better remember exactly who signs your paychecks, Jamal," Trent threatened, his voice dropping to a lethal, calculating volume. "You are the chief accountant at my company. You live in a house I helped finance for my sister. If you hand that woman that coat, you can clear out your desk on Monday morning and join her on the street. Do not test me tonight." I watched the fight instantly drain from Jamal's eyes. The threat was a direct, devastating hit to his livelihood and his marriage. He was trapped in their toxic web, dependent on Trent's corporate payroll to survive and provide for his own family. I did not blame him at all. I knew exactly how ruthlessly Trent and Patricia punished anyone who dared to defy their twisted family loyalty. With Jamal effectively silenced, the family turned their eager attention back to the sleek luxury sedan idling in our driveway. A driver in a sharp black suit rounded the hood and opened an oversized umbrella, holding it carefully over the passenger side. A pair of red stiletto heels stepped onto the wet asphalt, followed by the rest of Bianca. She was 28 years old and dripping in conspicuous, aggressive wealth. She wore a pristine white designer trench coat that looked ridiculous in the Seattle downpour. She clutched a limited edition handbag against her side, shaking out her salon-styled hair. She looked up at the house, ignoring my ruined belongings scattered across the lawn. This was the woman Trent had been secretly hiding. This was the self-proclaimed heiress Patricia and Courtney had so eagerly traded me for. Trent transformed instantly. The terrifying red-faced monster who had just hurled my luggage into the mud vanished. In his place stood a sickeningly eager, fawning suitor. He bounded down the wet concrete steps, ignoring my presence as he brushed past my shivering form. "Bianca, darling," Trent cooed, reaching her side and wrapping his arms tightly around her waist. He pulled her close and kissed her passionately right there in the rain. It was a deliberate, choreographed display of affection meant for my benefit, a final brutal stab to ensure I understood exactly how easily I had been replaced. When they pulled apart, Bianca let out a high artificial laugh. She finally allowed her eyes to land on me. She scanned my soaking wet clothes, my ruined hair, and the shattered pieces of my favorite coffee mug, resting in the mud. She did not look surprised or apologetic in the slightest. She looked at me the way someone might look at a piece of trash that had blown onto her pristine driveway. "Oh my goodness, Trent," Bianca purred, pressing herself dramatically against his side. "Is this the crazy ex-wife you told me about? The one who refuses to leave gracefully?" Trent kissed her temple, shooting me a glare of contempt. "Do not worry about her, baby. She was just leaving. Come inside. It is freezing out here. And you need to protect our little miracle." Our little miracle, the words hit my chest like a physical blow. The hypocrisy was so I could barely draw breath. Trent was parading his pregnant mistress into the house, proudly claiming her unborn child, while simultaneously rejecting his own biological baby growing inside me. Patricia and Courtney parted like the Red Sea. Their faces beamed with fake, overjoyed smiles as Trent escorted Bianca up the stairs. "Oh, Bianca, we are so thrilled you are finally here," Patricia gushed loudly, reaching out to take the younger woman's expensive coat. "Let us get you warmed up by the gorgeous fireplace inside." Trent paused at the threshold, keeping one arm firmly around Bianca's waist. He looked back at me over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with malicious, undeniable victory. "Goodbye, Sydney, I suggest you start walking." The heavy oak door slammed shut for the final time. I was left standing alone in the freezing rain, surrounded by the waterlogged ruins of my past. Shivering uncontrollably, I forced my frozen limbs to move, dropping to my knees in the freezing mud to salvage what little I could. Trent had insisted I keep my old car to save money, claiming his image as an executive required the luxury vehicles we leased under his name. Now that beat-up sedan was the only shelter I had left. I checked my bank application on my cracked phone screen. Trent had already drained our joint checking account, leaving a balance of $0. I had exactly $42 in my personal account. The despair threatening to pull me under suddenly shifted into a fierce, blinding resolve. I promised my unborn child that we would survive this. I swore I would claw my way back from nothingness if I had to. I was jolted awake by a sharp, jarring ringtone echoing through the freezing car. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital clock on the dashboard read exactly 6 in the morning. The rain had slowed to a steady, depressing drizzle. I scrambled to find my shattered phone in the footwell. The cracked screen flashed with an incoming call from an unknown high-end corporate number. Assuming it was Trent's lawyer calling to threaten me with early eviction proceedings, I swiped to answer, ready to fight. "Hello," I answered, my voice raspy and defensive. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Sydney Thorne?" The caller asked. His voice was deep, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable cadence of expensive legal counsel. "Nobody has called me by that last name in over a decade," I replied, my brow furrowing in confusion. Thorne was the name I had taken at 18, a lifetime ago. "My legal name is Sydney Preston now. Who is calling?" "My name is Mr. Caldwell," he stated calmly. "I am the senior estate attorney representing Gabriel Thorne. I have spent the better part of the night tracking you down, Sydney. I am calling to inform you that Gabriel passed away yesterday afternoon, following a sudden heart failure." The air vanished from the freezing car. Gabriel. The name pulled me back to a past I had buried. We had married hastily in a quiet courthouse ceremony in 2009, bonding over our shared trauma and a mutual desire to escape our grim circumstances. But 2 years later, we realized we were better as friends than spouses. We signed the divorce papers in 2011, hugged each other goodbye, and walked away to live our separate lives. "I am so sorry to hear that," I breathed out, genuine grief tightening my chest. "Gabriel was a good man, but Mr. Caldwell, I do not understand why you are calling me. Gabriel and I divorced over 10 years ago. You need to contact his next of kin. That is exactly why I am calling you," Mr. Caldwell replied, his tone shifting into sharp clinical precision. "You and Gabriel signed the divorce petition in 2011. However, due to a severe administrative error by the state clerk's office at the time, the final dissolution of marriage was never stamped or entered into the registry. We only discovered this oversight last night during the emergency audit of his estate." I sat still, the damp cold of the car was forgotten. "What are you saying, Mr. Caldwell?" "I am saying the divorce was never legally finalized," he explained slowly, letting the weight of the reality settle over the line. "Under the law, your subsequent marriage to your current husband is void. Legally speaking, Sydney, you are still Gabriel Thorne's wife. You are his legal widow." My mind reeled. If my marriage to Trent was void, then Trent had no legal right to anything. The house, the threats, the divorce he bragged about filing, all of it was built on a marriage that did not legally exist. He could not take half of my business or force me into a grueling legal battle over assets because we were never married. Before I could even process the magnitude of that revelation, Mr. Caldwell delivered the final, world-shaking blow. Gabriel never wrote a new will after you separated. Mr. Caldwell continued. As his lawful widow, you are the sole legal heir to his entire estate. This includes his private liquid assets and total ownership of his venture capital firm. You need to come to my office immediately. Sydney, you just inherited $50 million. The phone nearly slipped from my frozen fingers. $50 million. The number echoed in the cramped, damp interior of my beaten sedan like a transmission from another universe. I need you to come to my office at the Columbia Center immediately, Sydney, Mr. Caldwell instructed, his voice cutting through my shock with practiced authority. We have extensive paperwork to review, and the board of his venture capital firm is already demanding answers regarding the succession plan. I will have my security team clear you through the private parking garage. I looked down at my mud-stained coat and ruined shoes. I am currently sitting in a motel parking lot in wet clothes, I said, my voice shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. The man I thought was my husband threw me out last night. I do not exactly look like the CEO of a $50 million estate right now. Mr. Caldwell did not miss a single beat. You are the sole owner of Thorn Capital. Sydney, it does not matter if you walk into my office wearing a garbage bag. You own the building. I will see you in 20 minutes. I sat in the suffocating silence of my car for a long moment, my hands resting protectively over my stomach. Trent had thrown me away like trash, confident that I had no resources, no family, and no power to fight back. He had no idea that his cruelty had merely pushed me out the door, just in time to catch a golden parachute. The Columbia Center loomed against the gray morning sky. I bypassed the main lobby and drove into the secured underground garage, where a private elevator awaited me. When the polished steel doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a breathtaking expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Puget Sound. Mr. Caldwell was waiting for me. He walked me through the impossible reality step by step, producing the original 2009 marriage certificate, alongside the 2011 divorce petition that lacked the crucial judicial stamp. Your subsequent marriage to Trent is legally classified as void ab initio, Mr. Caldwell explained, tapping a manicured finger against a thick legal textbook. It means invalid from the start. He has zero claim to this $50 million estate. A cold, sharp wave of satisfaction washed over me. Trent thought he held all the legal cards. In reality, he was legally nothing to me. However, Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone shifting into something significantly more intense. The $50 million in liquid assets and real estate is only one half of the equation. The other half is Thorn Capital. Last night, I took the liberty of auditing the firm's primary debt portfolio to prepare you for immediate business operations. Mr. Caldwell slid a sleek black folder across the polished mahogany table. I opened the cover. The logo on the first page made the breath catch in my throat. It was the corporate crest of Trent's company, the very same company where he served as a senior executive, and where Jamal worked as the chief accountant. What is this, Mr. Caldwell? I asked, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. Your former partner's company took out an operational loan from Gabriel's firm 2 years ago to fund their aggressive expansion. They have defaulted on their last 3 payments. Yesterday afternoon, their CEO submitted a desperate plea for a $5 million loan extension. If Thorn Capital denies this extension and calls in the debt, that company will be forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by next Friday. I stared at the financial spreadsheets. Trent had kicked me out into the freezing rain, boasting about his corporate salary and his untouchable status. He had threatened Jamal's job to force him into submission. They all believed they held the high ground. But as I sat in that sky-high conference room looking at the exact documents that dictated whether Trent's company survived the week or collapsed into ruin, a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. If Thorn Capital denies this extension, what happens to Trent personally? I asked, my voice steadying with ice-cold clarity. When Trent's company took this initial loan, the executive board was required to put up their personal equity as collateral. Mr. Caldwell explained, if you deny the extension, Trent's equity shares will be legally transferred directly to Thorn Capital. He will be stripped of his title, his salary, and his entire net worth in a matter of hours. He will leave that building with nothing but a cardboard box. The image of Trent walking out of his glass office with a cheap box, just like the one he had dumped onto our flooded porch, sent a rush of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. "Where do I sign?" I asked. With every stroke of the heavy silver pen, the frightened, freezing woman who had slept in a motel parking lot faded further into the past. I was no longer a victim, I was the apex predator in a corporate jungle Trent thought he ruled. "Would you like me to draft the denial letter and initiate the asset seizure immediately?" Mr. Caldwell asked, gathering the binders. If I pulled the plug right now, Trent would be destroyed today. But an immediate execution was far too merciful for what he had done to me. I wanted him to feel secure right up until the very moment the floor collapsed beneath his feet. "No," I said softly. "Do not deny the extension yet. I want to set a trap. Send their board of directors an official notice that Thorn Capital is undergoing a transition of leadership, and place all loan extensions under an indefinite executive review. But while we string his company along, I want to start applying the pressure personally. Freeze every single corporate credit card issued to their executive board within the hour. I want Trent's financial oxygen cut off today." I stood up from the leather chair, suddenly hyper-aware of my ruined, mud-stained coat. I had the power, the money, and the strategy to dismantle the people who had tried to bury me. But if I was going to wage this war, I could no longer look like the broken wife who had been thrown out in the rain. I needed to look like the $50 million nightmare they were about to face. I thanked Mr. Caldwell, took the limitless black titanium card he handed me, and prepared to transform myself. I spent the next 2 days in the security of my luxury penthouse, watching the financial traps I had set begin to close. Through Mr. Caldwell, I sent a formal legal summons directly to Trent, Patricia, and Courtney. I demanded they meet me at the Columbia Center on Friday at noon to finalize the division of our assets. Predictably, their blinding greed ensured they would not miss it. Friday arrived with a crisp, brilliant blue sky that felt like a stark contrast to the impending slaughter. I sat at the head of the mahogany table inside Mr. Caldwell's ultra-modern conference room at the Columbia Center. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected pure, unyielding authority. Caldwell sat to my right, his pristine leather briefcase resting closed on the table. We did not need to review our strategy. The legal trap was already set, fully loaded, and simply waiting for the prey to step onto the trigger. At exactly noon, the heavy glass doors swung open. Trent strutted into the room first, radiating a sickening aura of unearned confidence. He had clearly spent hours grooming himself for this exact moment, wearing his most expensive navy suit and a carefully practiced expression of deep marital concern. Patricia wore a lavish string of pearls, clearly dressing for the new tax bracket she felt she was about to enter. Trailing the family was a sharp-featured man in his 50s carrying a bulging briefcase. This was undeniably the aggressive attack dog lawyer. Patricia had liquidated her retirement account to hire. "We will call him Mr. Pierce." Trent immediately walked over to my side of the table. He ignored the empty leather chair positioned across from me and instead pulled a seat right up next to mine. He reached out, attempting to cover my hand with his own, ignoring the fact that just a few days ago, he had thrown my belongings into the freezing mud and paraded his pregnant mistress into my home. "Sydney, sweetheart," Trent murmured, his voice dripping with artificial warmth. "You look beautiful today. My mother, my sister, and I have been so worried about you. We are just so glad we can finally sit down as a family and get everything sorted out. We want to support you through this transition." I smoothly withdrew my hand, sliding it off the table and resting it gracefully on my lap. The physical rejection caused a brief, ugly flash of anger to spark in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a martyred sigh. He took his seat, leaning back and crossing his legs like a king preparing to collect his taxes. He believed his performance was, he thought, I was still the vulnerable, compliant wife who would desperately cling to his fake affection to avoid a confrontation. Mr. Pierce did not bother with pleasantries. He stepped up to the table and slammed a thick, tabbed manila folder down onto the polished mahogany surface. The loud smack echoed through the quiet conference room, a deliberate intimidation tactic meant to rattle me. "Let us bypass the formalities and get straight to the point, Mr. Pierce stated, his voice booming with arrogant authority. "My client, your husband, has been remarkably patient and forgiving regarding your recent erratic behavior. However, we are fully aware of the $50 million estate you recently inherited. Under the state property laws governing this jurisdiction, any assets acquired during the timeline of a legal marriage are classified as shared marital property." Patricia shifted in her seat, lifting her chin proudly. Courtney actively smirked, pulling out her phone as if she were preparing to shop for yachts the second this meeting concluded. They were barely containing their sheer greed. Mr. Pierce tapped his index finger against the folder. "We have prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement. Trent is willing to be generous. He is asking for exactly 50% of the total estate. $25 million transferred into his personal accounts within 14 business days. In exchange, he will agree to an amicable, uncontested divorce, and he will graciously allow you to keep your little public relations business." I stared at the lawyer, my expression blank. "And if I refuse this generous offer?" I asked, my tone devoid of any emotion. Mr. Pierce leaned across the table, showing his teeth in a predatory grin. "If you refuse, we will immediately file for a publicized contested divorce. We will petition the court to freeze all 50 million of your inherited assets until a judge can rule on the division. That is a brutal process that will take years. Furthermore, my client is fully prepared to take his story to the media. We will paint you as an unstable, manipulative gold digger who abandoned her devoted husband the second she came into money. Your professional reputation will be annihilated. Sign the papers today, Sydney, or we will drag you through a legal hell you cannot possibly afford to fight." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Trent sat up taller, a look of supreme, undeniable victory plastered across his handsome face. He believed he had cornered me. Patricia let out a soft, triumphant sigh, tasting the millions she thought were about to flood her bank account. Courtney crossed her arms, looking at me with pure contempt, waiting for me to break down and surrender. I did not flinch, I did not raise my voice, I did not offer a single word of defense against their ridiculous, fabricated threats. I slowly reached for the crystal glass resting in front of me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the ice-cold water, letting the crisp liquid cool my throat while they all watched me with eager, greedy anticipation. I set the glass down with a soft, definitive clink. I turned my head, locked eyes with Mr. Caldwell, and gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. It was time to drop the bomb. Mr. Caldwell calmly unclasped the brass latches of his pristine leather briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks echoed like a judge's gavel in the tense silence of the conference room. He did not rush. He withdrew a single slender file folder, his movements precise and devoid of the aggressive theatrics Mr. Pierce had employed. He placed the file squarely in the center of the table, resting his hands lightly on top of it. "Mr. Pierce," Caldwell began, his voice maintaining the measured, unbothered tone of a man who held every single winning card. "Your settlement proposal is certainly ambitious. It relies on the statutes governing shared marital property in this jurisdiction. However, there is a fundamental flaw in your legal strategy. In order for assets to be classified as marital property, and therefore subject to division, there must first be a legally recognized marriage." Trent frowned, a flicker of confusion breaking through his arrogant facade. "What are you talking about? Sydney and I have been married for 5 years. We have a marriage certificate." Mr. Pierce puffed out his chest, stepping forward to defend his client's claim. "If you are attempting to stall by questioning the validity of the marriage license, I assure you it is fully registered with the county." "We are not playing semantic games today, Caldwell. We are certainly not playing games," Caldwell replied smoothly, sliding the file across the table until it stopped directly in front of Trent's aggressive attorney. "I suggest you review the documents inside that folder, Mr. Pierce. The certified records obtained directly from the state clerk's office regarding my client's previous marriage in 2009. Patricia scoffed loudly, waving a dismissive hand. Sydney was a teenager. That ridiculous little marriage was dissolved ages ago. Trent told us all about it. It was a complete joke. A petition for dissolution was filed. Caldwell corrected, his eyes locking onto Mr. Pierce, whose face was rapidly losing color as he scanned the first page. But due to a critical administrative error, the final decree was never officially stamped or entered into the legal registry. The divorce was never legally finalized. Trent stared at his lawyer. The smug certainty began to melt off his face, replaced by a creeping cold dread. Pierce, what is he talking about? What does that mean? Mr. Pierce did not answer immediately. He flipped to the second page, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. The aggressive attack dog was suddenly realizing he had walked his client straight into a legal minefield. It means, Caldwell stated, delivering the lethal blow with surgical precision, that when Sydney entered into a marriage contract with you 5 years ago, she was still legally married to Gabriel Thorne. Under the laws of this state, your marriage to my client is classified as unintentional bigamy. The legal term is void ab initio. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hard, unforgiving tone. It means invalid from the very start. You are not her legal husband, Trent. You have never been her legal husband. Therefore, there are no marital assets to divide. There is no divorce to contest. You are legally a stranger to my client, and you are entitled to nothing. The silence that followed Mr. Caldwell's declaration was so profound. I could hear the faint ticking of my diamond watch. Trent stared at the senior attorney, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He turned his desperate, frantic gaze toward Mr. Pierce, waiting for his paid attack dog to rip this argument to shreds. But Mr. Pierce was not attacking. The aggressive lawyer was silent, his eyes frantically scanning the certified documents bearing the official raised seal of the state. He flipped the pages, reading the statutes, verifying the dates, and confirming the total absence of the final judicial signature on my 2011 divorce decree. Do something, Trent hissed, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. Pierce, you told me we had a bulletproof case. Tell him he is lying. Mr. Pierce slowly closed the manila folder. He did not look at Trent, he looked directly at Mr. Caldwell with the grim, professional resignation of a man who knew he had just been outmaneuvered. He is not lying, Mr. Pierce said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. The state law is unambiguous on this matter. Void ab initio means the marriage never legally existed. You have no community property rights. You have no legal standing to claim a single penny of her inheritance. Patricia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp, all the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a withered gray ghost. She clutched her pearl necklace, her chest heaving as the reality of her shattered payday set in. Courtney grabbed the edge of the table, her manicured nails scraping against the polished wood. She began taking short, rapid breaths, hyperventilating as the millions she had already spent in her mind vanished into thin air. Mr. Pierce stood up. He did not ask for permission. He simply reached for his briefcase, snapped the brass clasps open, and shoved his useless settlement documents inside. Where do you think you are going? Trent demanded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. You work for me. You are going to fix this. I work for clients who actually have a legal case, Mr. Pierce replied coldly, snapping his briefcase shut. And more importantly, I work for clients who can afford to pay my billable hours. Since you are not legally entitled to $25 million, and your personal bank accounts are currently empty, my services are officially terminated. Have a good afternoon. The lawyer turned on his heel and marched straight out of the conference room, abandoning his clients without a single backward glance. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney inside their own personal nightmare. Trent fell back into his chair, his hands trembling. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading. Sydney, please, he begged, his voice breaking. You cannot do this. We built a life together. I bought that house with you. We were starting a family. You cannot just erase 5 years of our lives on a legal technicality. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I am not erasing anything, Trent. I am simply holding you to your own standard. You looked me in the eye on a freezing, flooded porch, handed me a garbage bag of ruined clothes, and told me I was nothing. You threw a stranger out into the storm so you could move your fake heiress into my home. You just forgot to make sure that did not have the power to destroy you. Patricia tried to speak, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Sydney, we can find a compromise, we are reasonable people. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Trent. We are finished discussing my personal life, I stated, my tone shifting from cold rejection to sharp corporate authority. Now let us move on to official business. I gave Mr. Caldwell another nod. He opened his briefcase a second time and withdrew a sleek black folder bearing the silver crest of Thorn Capital. He slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Trent. As the majority shareholder and acting chief executive officer of Thorn Capital, I said, every word dripping with lethal precision, I have completed the executive review of your company's financial status. I have reviewed the fraudulent accounting, the hidden operational losses, and the desperate request for a $5 million loan extension. Trent's eyes darted down to the folder. He recognized his own corporate financials. The last shred of color left his face. As your primary creditor, I am officially denying your request for the loan extension, I declared. Furthermore, due to the severe breach of contract and the fraudulent financial reporting submitted to my firm, I am calling in your existing debt. The entire balance is due immediately by the close of business today. You cannot do that, Trent screamed, leaping out of his chair. If you call in the debt today, the company defaults. My shares are the collateral. You will wipe out my entire equity. I will lose my job, I will lose everything I have worked for. Yes, I replied calmly. Your shares are forfeit. They will be legally transferred to Thorn Capital within the hour. You are no longer an executive, you have no salary, no corporate credit card, and no equity. You are bankrupt. Trent stood paralyzed, his mind finally grasping the inescapable totality of his ruin. He had no marriage to leverage for cash. He had no house, as his name on the deed meant nothing without the funds to pay the mortgage. He had no job to run back to. He was assetless, standing in the very clothes he had bought with money he no longer possessed. He was ruined. Patricia began to weep openly, burying her face in her hands. Courtney was clutching her chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack took hold. They had walked into this high-rise office expecting to conquer an empire. Instead, they had been stripped down to nothingness. Trent stumbled backward, defeated, broken, and devoid of his former arrogant swagger. He turned toward the heavy glass doors, desperate to escape the room, to run away and hide from the catastrophic wreckage of his own making. But as his hand reached for the door handle, I spoke one last time, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the conference room. Do not leave just yet, Trent, I commanded softly, a razor-sharp smile curving my lips. We are not finished here. Wait, there is one more guest. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Jamal stepped across the threshold. He wore a sharp, impeccably tailored suit, standing tall and projecting an aura of unshakable confidence. He no longer looked like the trapped, humiliated accountant who had lowered his head in shame on my flooded porch. He looked like a man who had finally broken his chains and reclaimed his entire identity. Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer outrage. Jamal, what in the world are you doing here? She demanded, her voice shrill with arrogant confusion. You are supposed to be at the office fixing this financial mess. Trent glared at his brother-in-law, a flash of his old toxic authority attempting to resurface despite his recent financial execution. Jamal, get back to work immediately. I did not authorize you to leave the building, let alone come to my private legal meeting. Jamal did not flinch, he did not lower his gaze, he simply walked past his frantic wife and his ruined boss, stepping directly up to the mahogany table. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, tabbed manila folder. He dropped it onto the polished wood surface, right next to the corporate financial documents Mr. Caldwell had just presented. The heavy thud echoed like a final nail being driven into a coffin. I do not take orders from you anymore, Trent, Jamal stated, his deep voice ringing with authority. My resignation was submitted to Human Resources an hour ago. But before I cleared out my desk, I decided to do a little independent auditing. Not just on the fraudulent corporate accounts you tried to force me to hide, but on the new woman you so proudly moved into Sydney's home. Patricia let out a shaky breath, clutching her chest as a new wave of panic washed over her. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the folder. "Bianca is an international mining heiress. She comes from a very prominent, wealthy family." Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. He flipped open the cover of the dossier, revealing a stack of background checks, credit reports, and court records. "There is no international mining conglomerate," Jamal said, his words slicing through the room with lethal precision. "Her real name is Bianca Rossi. She does not have a trust fund. She does not have a billionaire father. What she does have is over $150,000 in maxed-out credit card debt, 2 repossessed vehicles, and 3 outstanding civil judgments against her for severe financial fraud spanning across 4 different states." Trent stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the table, as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. "No," he stammered, his eyes frantically scanning the highlighted legal documents. "No, that is impossible. She showed me her portfolio, she showed me the investment accounts. She showed you forged documents she bought off the internet, Trent," Jamal corrected mercilessly. "She is a serial scam artist who targets arrogant men in expensive suits. She spotted you throwing around a limitless corporate credit card at that networking event and realized you were the perfect, gullible mark. She needed a wealthy idiot to pay off her debts and fund her luxury lifestyle. You handed her the keys to Sydney's house on a silver platter." Courtney let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She gripped her styled hair, shaking her head. "This cannot be happening. We told everyone at the country club about her family. We introduced her to the board. We bragged about her pedigree." "It gets substantially worse," Jamal continued, refusing to offer them a single ounce of mercy. "Trent, you threw your loyal wife out into the freezing rain because you claimed Bianca was carrying your child. You bragged to everyone about securing your legacy." Trent swallowed hard, a sickly pale sheen covering his face. He looked at Jamal with raw, undisguised terror. "She is pregnant," Trent whispered desperately, his voice cracking. "I saw the ultrasound. I went to the clinic with her. That baby is mine." Jamal pulled a final document from the back of the folder. It was a printed collection of text messages, emails, and eviction notices retrieved by a private investigator. "Bianca is currently facing an eviction lawsuit at her downtown apartment complex," Jamal explained, tossing the papers directly in front of Trent. "She has not paid rent in over 8 months. To avoid being thrown out onto the street, she has been sleeping with her 52-year-old landlord since last summer." The room went dead silent. The horrific realization began to dawn on Trent, his eyes widening to the size of saucers as he stared at the text message transcripts. "That baby does not belong to you, Trent," Jamal stated, delivering the fatal strike. "The timeline matches with her landlord. She got pregnant by a middle-aged man she was using for free rent. When she realized he had no actual money to support a child, she panicked. She went out hunting for a wealthy savior to pin the pregnancy on. And you walked right into her trap. You are not her knight in shining armor, you are just her newest wallet. And now that your corporate card is declined, she is already packing her bags." Trent physically collapsed, his knees gave out, and he crashed down into the leather chair, staring blankly at the wall. His mind was tearing itself apart as the astronomical weight of his catastrophic failure finally crushed him. Patricia buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly, mourning the total destruction of her social standing and the imaginary wealth she had banked her entire future on. Courtney stood frozen, staring at her husband in sheer terror, realizing that Jamal held all the cards and was no longer playing their toxic family games. I watched Trent's chest heave as he struggled to draw breath. He looked down at his shaking, empty hands. The devastating comparison hit him like a freight train. He threw away a loyal billionaire wife and his own flesh and blood, all so he could ruin his career, face federal fraud charges, and lose his home for a bankrupt scam artist who was carrying a stranger's baby. He had traded a diamond for a handful of toxic dirt, and he was finally choking on it. The silence in the conference room shattered as the sheer reality of their destruction finally set in. Patricia was the first to snap. The woman who had prized her elite social standing above all else suddenly lunged across the mahogany table. Her hand struck Trent's cheek with a sharp, echoing slap that whipped his head to the side. "You fool!" Patricia shrieked, her voice devoid of its usual aristocratic polish. "You threw away $50 million for a destitute scam artist. You bankrupted your company. You humiliated our family in front of the entire city. And you dragged me into this mess. We are going to lose everything because you could not keep your ego in check." Trent just sat there, clutching his stinging cheek, staring blankly at the floor as his mother continued to scream at him. He was hollowed out, a broken shell of the arrogant man who had strutted into the room an hour ago. Courtney, meanwhile, turned her frantic, venomous rage toward the only target she felt she could still control. She marched right up to Jamal, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly entitlement. "How dare you do this to us?" Courtney screamed, jabbing her finger into her husband's chest. "You are supposed to protect this family. You are supposed to fix his accounting, not hand the evidence over to her. You are going to march back to that office right now, shred those documents, and figure out a way to save my brother's company. If you do not fix this today, Jamal, I swear I will make your life a living nightmare." Jamal did not flinch. He looked down at the woman he had spent a decade trying to please, and his expression held nothing but cold exhaustion. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He pressed it firmly into Courtney's chest, forcing her to take it. "I am not fixing anything for your brother ever again," Jamal stated, his deep voice echoing with profound liberation. "Those are the signed divorce papers, Courtney. My lawyer filed them with the county court this morning. I am officially resigning from my position at the company effective immediately. You can keep the house, the cars, and the country club memberships. They are all about to be seized by federal creditors anyway. Have a nice life." Courtney looked down at the legal envelope in her trembling hands. The vicious anger drained from her face, replaced instantly by sheer suffocating panic. She looked up at Jamal, her mouth opening to argue, but he simply turned his back on her and walked calmly over to my side of the table, aligning himself with the winning team. I stood up slowly, smoothing the sharp lines of my charcoal suit. The sudden movement drew every eye in the room. Trent finally looked up from the floor. His eyes were red-rimmed, wide, and filled with a pathetic, desperate pleading. He opened his mouth, likely to beg for a fraction of mercy, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "Do not say a single word, Trent," I commanded, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register that froze the air in the room. "I want you to remember the freezing rain on Tuesday night. I want you to remember the exact sound my luggage made when you threw it into the mud. You looked me in the eyes and told me I was a stray dog. You told me I had no family, no pedigree, and nothing to my name." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished table, making sure he felt the full, crushing weight of my presence. "You thought you were burying me. You thought you could strip me of my dignity and leave me to freeze while you celebrated your brilliant little scam. But throwing my bags out into that storm was the greatest favor you ever did for me. You did not break me, Trent. You simply handed me the key to my own cage. And while you were busy playing a wealthy executive for a broke, desperate fraud, I stepped into an empire. I picked up the black titanium card resting on the table and slipped it carefully into my designer handbag. You are bankrupt, I finalized, staring down at the miserable, broken man who used to be my husband. You are facing federal fraud charges and you are alone. You built your own grave, Trent. Now you get to lie in it. I turned on my heel, my red stiletto heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Mr. Caldwell and Jamal fell into step right behind me like a paid loyal vanguard. I walked straight through the heavy glass doors of the conference room, leaving Trent, Patricia, and Courtney screaming at each other, amidst the total catastrophic wreckage of their own greed. 6 months later, the Seattle rain had given way to a brilliant, sun-drenched afternoon. I sat on a plush outdoor sofa in the sprawling manicured gardens of my $50 million estate. The gentle breeze rolled off the Puget Sound, carrying the scent of blooming hydrangeas. I looked down at the beautiful, healthy baby boy resting safely in my arms. He had Gabriel's dark hair and my stubborn chin, a physical testament to survival and new beginnings. The heavy glass patio doors slid open and Jamal walked out onto the terrace. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, looking rejuvenated. As the newly appointed chief financial officer of Thorn Capital, he had spent the last 6 months restructuring the firm's lending portfolio. He handed me a crisp financial report, a warm, genuine smile lighting up his face. "Everything is secured, Sydney," Jamal reported proudly. "The final corporate liquidation for Trent's old firm went through this morning." I took the report, bouncing my son gently on my knee. "And Trent?" I asked, my tone conversational. Jamal let out a short, satisfied laugh. He pleaded guilty to the corporate fraud charges to avoid a maximum sentence. He is currently working a grueling minimum-wage construction job, digging ditches on the highway just to pay off the court-ordered restitution. Patricia and Courtney are living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, fighting constantly about money. I looked out at the glittering ocean, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace wash over my entire soul. They were irrelevant now, nothing more than a distant, ugly memory fading into the background of my bright future. I pressed a soft kiss to my son's forehead. There are betrayals that feel like the end of the world, moments that convince you everything you built has been destroyed. But sometimes, the universe strips away the toxic weight holding you down just to force you to step into your true power. I learned that you never have to destroy the people who try to break you. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge is not anger or retaliation. It is a life beautifully, fearlessly lived, soaring so high that they do not even have the right to look at you anymore. Have you ever chosen to walk away and heal instead of seeking revenge? Share your story in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and remember, true power comes from building your own empire in silence.